What happens when one of Hollywood's most powerful moguls sits down for what should be a friendly morning show appearance, only to have the entire conversation spiral into one of the most uncomfortable television moments in recent memory? Tyler Perry, the billionaire filmmaker behind countless box office hits and beloved characters, walked off the Good Morning America set after a clash with co-host Michael Strahan that left the studio in complete shock. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a simple disagreement. This was a full-blown confrontation that exposed tensions nobody saw coming. And before we break down every moment of what went wrong, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're going to want to discuss this one. The interview started, innocently enough. Tyler Perry walked onto the Good Morning America set with his usual calm demeanor. Settling into the chair across from Michael Strahan, the energy seemed fine at first. Strahan opened with the standard pleasantries, thanking Perry for joining them and congratulating him on his latest project. Perry smiled, nodded, and seemed ready for what everyone assumed would be another typical promotional interview. But within minutes, the tone began to shift in ways that caught everyone off guard. Strahan leaned forward, transitioning from the warm-up questions into something more pointed. "Tyler, you've built an empire. There's no question about that," Strahan said, "but there's been a lot of conversation lately about representation in your films, particularly when it comes to how black men are portrayed. Some critics have said your work leans heavily into stereotypes. What's your response to that?" Perry's expression changed immediately. The smile faded, replaced by something harder to read. He paused, taking a breath before responding. "Michael, I appreciate the question, but I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what I do," Perry said, his tone measured but firm. "I create stories for an audience that has been overlooked for decades. My characters aren't stereotypes. They're reflections of real people in real communities. If some critics don't understand that, maybe they're not the audience I'm speaking to." Strahan didn't back down. "But Tyler, when you have the platform you have, when you're one of the few black creators with this level of power in Hollywood, don't you think there's a responsibility to challenge those perceptions rather than reinforce them? I mean, we're talking about imagery that some people feel sets us back." The word "us" hung in the air, and Perry caught it immediately. His jaw tightened. "Sets us back," Perry repeated, his voice rising slightly. "Michael, with all due respect, I don't think you get to decide what sets us back. I've employed thousands of black actors, writers, and crew members. I've told stories that major studios wouldn't touch. I've built something from nothing, and now I'm supposed to sit here and defend my work like I'm the problem." Strahan held his ground, leaning back slightly but keeping eye contact. "I'm not saying you're the problem, Tyler. I'm asking if you see the criticism as valid. There are black filmmakers, black actors, people within the community who have raised these concerns. Are you saying their perspective doesn't matter?" Perry laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Their perspective matters, but so does mine," he said. "You know what's interesting, Michael? I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've faced rejection, discrimination, and every obstacle you can imagine. And now that I've succeeded, now that I've built something that can't be ignored, suddenly everyone wants to tear it down. Where were these critics when I was struggling? Where were they when studios were slamming doors in my face?" The studio had gone quiet. The crew, the producers, even the other co-hosts sitting nearby seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let it play out. Strahan, to his credit, didn't flinch. "I hear you, Tyler, and nobody's discounting your success," he said, "but success doesn't make you immune to criticism. Some of the most successful people in any field face scrutiny. It's part of being in the public eye." Perry shook his head slowly, his frustration becoming more visible. "Scrutiny is fine, Michael. I welcome healthy debate. But what I don't appreciate is being ambushed on a morning show that's supposed to be about celebrating my work. You're framing this conversation like I owe someone an apology, and I don't." Strahan's expression shifted, a flash of something, defensiveness, maybe frustration, crossing his face. "I'm not trying to ambush you," he said. "I'm asking questions that a lot of people want answered. Isn't that what journalism is supposed to be?" Perry leaned forward now, matching Strahan's energy. "Journalism," he said, his voice sharp. "Michael, this isn't journalism. This is a hit piece disguised as an interview. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my new project, and instead, you're putting me on trial. If you wanted to have this conversation, you should have been upfront about it." The tension was palpable. Strahan opened his mouth to respond, but Perry wasn't finished. "And let's be real for a second," Perry continued. "You're sitting here questioning my contributions to the black community. But where's this energy when you're interviewing people who've done far less? Where's this intensity when you've got guests who've actively harmed our community? I find it interesting that I'm the one getting grilled." Strahan's face hardened. "That's not fair, Tyler," he said. "I ask tough questions to everyone who sits in that chair. Don't make this personal." Perry laughed again, that same bitter edge in his voice. "It's already personal. Michael, you made it personal the moment you decided to frame this conversation the way you did. You think I don't see what's happening here? You think I don't know how this game works?" The energy in the studio had shifted completely. What started as a standard interview had become something else entirely. A confrontation that neither man seemed willing to walk away from. Strahan tried to regain control of the conversation, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "Tyler, I think you're misinterpreting my intentions," he said. "I'm not attacking you. I'm giving you an opportunity to address concerns that exist in the public sphere." Perry cut him off. "An opportunity," he said, his voice louder now. "Michael, you don't get to frame this as a favor. You don't get to act like you're doing me a service by putting me in a position to defend myself on live television. This isn't an opportunity. It's a setup." Strahan's composure was starting to crack. "A setup," he repeated, his tone sharper. "Tyler, come on. You're a public figure. You've made billions off of your work. People have opinions about that work. I'm simply asking you to engage with those opinions." Perry stood up slightly, not fully rising but shifting in his seat, like he was preparing to leave. "Engage with them how, Michael? By agreeing with you, by admitting that everything I've built is somehow problematic. That's not engaging. That's capitulating." The producers off camera were visibly panicking now, exchanging frantic looks and hand signals. One of them stepped forward slightly, as if considering whether to cut to commercial, but Strahan waved them off. He wasn't backing down. "Nobody's asking you to capitulate," Strahan said, his voice firm. "But maybe, just maybe, there's some validity to what people are saying. Maybe there's room for growth, for evolution in how you tell these stories." Perry stared at him, his expression unreadable. "Evolution," he said slowly, turning the word over like it tasted bad. "Michael, I don't need lectures on evolution from someone who's spent his career playing it safe. You want to talk about growth? Let's talk about how you've navigated your career. Let's talk about the choices you've made, the controversies you've avoided. It's easy to sit in that chair and critique others when you've never taken the risks I have." The room went completely silent. Strahan's face flushed, his jaw working as he processed what Perry had just said. "That's out of line," Strahan said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "You don't know anything about the risks I've taken or the sacrifices I've made." Perry leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're right, I don't," he said, "just like you don't know anything about mine. But the difference is, I'm not sitting here questioning your legacy." Strahan took a breath, clearly trying to steady himself. "This isn't about legacy, Tyler. This is about accountability." Perry laughed, sharp and cold. "Accountability to who? Michael, to you. Two critics who've never created anything. I'm accountable to my audience. The people who show up for my films, who connect with my stories. That's who I answer to." The conversation had reached a breaking point. The producers were no longer trying to hide their panic. One of them stepped fully into view, gesturing toward Strahan, but he ignored them. "Your audience deserves better," Strahan said, and the words landed like a slap. Perry went still. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then, slowly, he stood up. "We're done here," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. Strahan stood up as well, his hands raised slightly in a gesture that could have been reconciliation or challenge. "Tyler, sit down," he said. "Let's finish this conversation like adults." Perry shook his head, already removing his microphone. "Adults," he repeated. "Michael, adults don't ambush each other on national television. Adults don't invite someone onto their show just to tear them down. You want to have a conversation about my work? Call me, set up a real discussion. But this," he gestured around the studio, "this isn't a conversation. This is theater, and I'm not performing for you." Strahan's expression hardened further. "You're walking away because you don't want to answer the questions," he said. "That's what this is really about. You can't handle criticism. So you're running." Perry stopped mid-motion, his hands freezing on the mic pack at his waist. He turned slowly to face Strahan, and the look in his eyes was ice cold. "Running," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Michael, I've been facing criticism since before you knew what a camera was. I've dealt with rejection, racism, and every form of disrespect you can imagine. Don't you dare stand there and tell me I can't handle criticism." Strahan stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "Then prove it," he said. "Sit back down and defend your work. Show everyone watching that you can handle a real conversation." Perry laughed, but it was hollow. "A real conversation," he repeated. "That's rich, coming from you. You know what I think, Michael? I think you're so desperate to prove you're a serious journalist that you're willing to sacrifice someone who's actually done something meaningful. You want to build your reputation by tearing down mine, and I'm not going to give you that satisfaction." The accusation hung between them, raw and cutting. Strahan's face twisted with anger. "That's what you think this is about," he said, his voice rising. "My reputation? Tyler, this has nothing to do with me. This is about you refusing to take responsibility for the impact your work has." Perry took a step forward now, matching Strahan's energy. "Impact," he said. "You want to talk about impact? My films have grossed over $1 billion. I've created jobs for thousands of people. I've told stories that resonate with millions. What impact have you had, Michael? What have you built? What legacy are you leaving behind besides reading off a teleprompter?" The insult landed hard. Strahan's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "You don't get to diminish what I do," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I've worked my entire life to get where I am, and I'm not going to apologize for asking hard questions." Perry shook his head, a bitter smile on his face. "Hard questions," he said. "Michael, you wouldn't know a hard question if it hit you in the face. You're asking surface-level talking points that you probably got from some producer who wanted to create a viral moment. You're not interested in the truth. You're interested in clicks and ratings." Strahan took another step closer, and for a moment, it looked like the situation might escalate beyond words. One of the producers finally intervened, stepping between them with hands raised. "Gentlemen, let's take a breath," the producer said, his voice urgent but controlled. "We can pause, regroup, and figure this out." Perry turned to the producer, his expression softening slightly, but still firm. "There's nothing to figure out," he said. "I'm leaving. This interview is over." The producer looked panicked. "Tyler, please," he said. "We can edit this. We can start fresh. Just give us 5 minutes." Perry shook his head. "No," he said simply. "I'm not interested in editing or starting fresh. I'm done. You all knew what you were doing when you set this up, and now you're dealing with the consequences." Strahan spoke up again, his voice cutting through the tension. "So that's it," he said. "You're just going to walk away and let everyone think you can't defend yourself." Perry turned back to him, his eyes blazing. "Michael, I don't care what people think," he said. "I stopped caring about that a long time ago. The people who matter, the people who support my work, they know who I am and what I stand for. Everyone else can think whatever they want." Strahan scoffed. "That's convenient," he said. "Hide behind your audience and refuse to engage with legitimate criticism. Real mature, Tyler." Perry's face went completely still, and when he spoke, his voice was calm but lethal. "You want to talk about maturity," he said. "Let's talk about how you're using your platform to attack someone instead of uplift them. Let's talk about how you're more interested in creating conflict than fostering dialogue. That's not journalism, Michael. That's exploitation." Strahan's face flushed red. "I'm exploiting you," he said incredulously. "Tyler, you've built your entire career on exploitation. You've exploited stereotypes. You've exploited your audience's loyalty. And now you're exploiting the victim card to avoid accountability." The words hit like a punch. Perry went completely silent, staring at Strahan with an expression that was equal parts shock and rage. The crew, the producers, everyone in the studio seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Perry's hands trembled slightly, and for a moment, it looked like he might say something, might unleash everything he was feeling. But instead, he took a deep breath, composed himself, and spoke with chilling clarity. "You just showed your hand, Michael," Perry said quietly. "Everything you needed to say, you just said. And now everyone watching knows exactly who you are and what this was really about." Strahan opened his mouth to respond, but Perry held up a hand, cutting him off. "I'm not interested in your justifications," Perry said. "I'm not interested in your excuses. You wanted a moment, you got it. Congratulations." He turned to leave, and this time, no one tried to stop him. The producers stepped back, knowing there was no recovering from what had just happened. Strahan stood frozen, his face a mixture of anger and something else. Regret, maybe, or realization that he'd gone too far. Perry walked toward the edge of the set, his movements deliberate and controlled. But Strahan couldn't let it end there. "Tyler," he called out, his voice echoing across the studio. "You can walk away, but this conversation isn't over. People are going to keep asking these questions, whether you like it or not." Perry stopped but didn't turn around. "Then let them ask," he said, over his shoulder. "But they're not going to get the answers they want from me. I don't owe anyone an explanation for my life's work, especially not people who've never walked in my shoes." He started walking again, but Strahan wasn't finished. "That's the problem right there," Strahan said, his voice louder now, more desperate. "You think you're above criticism. You think because you've achieved success, you don't have to answer to anyone. But that's not how this works. Tyler, that's not how any of this works." Perry spun around, his patience finally snapping. "How? What works? Michael," he shouted, his voice filling the studio. "How Hollywood works. How the media works. I know exactly how it works. I've been navigating this system for decades while people like you were just figuring out which camera to smile at. Don't lecture me about how things work." Strahan walked toward him, closing the distance again. "Then educate me," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Explain to me how I'm wrong. Explain to me how your portrayal of black characters isn't problematic. I'm listening." Perry stared at him, and for a long moment, the silence was deafening. Then he spoke, his voice low and intense. "You want me to explain?" He said. "Fine, my characters are flawed. Michael, they're messy, they're complicated, they're real. They're not perfect representations designed to make white audiences comfortable or to satisfy critics who think they know better. They're human beings with struggles and triumphs. And yes, sometimes they reinforce certain images. But you know what? So does real life. So do real people in real communities. I'm not in the business of creating propaganda. I'm in the business of telling stories. Strahan shook his head, his frustration evident. Stories have power. Tyler, he said, they shape how people see the world, how they see themselves. You have a responsibility to be conscious of that power. Perry's face twisted with frustration. I am conscious of it, he said. Every single day, I'm conscious of it. But I'm also conscious of the fact that I can't please everyone. I can't make movies that satisfy every critic, every academic, every person with an opinion. All I can do is stay true to the stories I want to tell and the people I want to tell them to. If that's not good enough for you, then that's your problem, not mine. Strahan's voice rose again, matching Perry's intensity. It's not just my problem, Tyler. It's the problem of everyone who's tired of seeing the same tired narratives repeated over and over. It's the problem of young black kids who grow up thinking those stereotypes are all they can be. Perry exploded. Don't you dare, he said, his voice thundering through the studio. Don't you dare use children as a weapon against me. I've done more for young black kids than you could ever understand. I've created scholarships. I've funded programs. I've given opportunities to people who had none. And my films, they show families, communities, resilience, and love. If you can't see that, if all you see are stereotypes, then maybe the problem is your perspective, not my work. The accusation hung in the air, and Strahan looked like he'd been slapped. His face went from red to pale, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for words. My perspective, he finally said, his voice strained. Tyler, I'm trying to have a conversation about representation, about responsibility, and you're making it personal. Perry laughed bitterly. It's been personal from the beginning. Michael, he said, you made it personal when you decided to use your platform to attack me. You made it personal when you framed this entire interview as an interrogation. So don't stand there and act surprised that I'm responding in kind. Strahan took a breath, trying to regain some composure. Tyler, I'm going to ask you one more time, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Do you or do you not acknowledge that some of your work has been criticized for perpetuating harmful stereotypes? It's a yes or no question. Perry stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You want a yes or no answer? He said. Fine. No, I don't acknowledge that. Because the premise of your question is flawed. You're asking me to accept criticism as fact, and I refuse to do that. My work speaks for itself. The millions of people who support it speak for themselves. And if you and a handful of critics want to reduce all of that to stereotypes, that's your choice. But it's not my reality. Strahan's jaw tightened. So you're saying the criticism is invalid? He said. You're saying everyone who's raised concerns is wrong. Perry shook his head slowly. I'm saying that criticism is subjective. Michael, what you see as a stereotype, someone else sees as their grandmother, their uncle, their neighbor. You don't get to decide what's valid representation for an entire community. Nobody does. Strahan stepped forward again, his voice rising. But you're making that decision every time you create a character. Tyler, you're deciding what gets put out into the world, what images get amplified. And when those images are harmful, you can't just wash your hands of it. Perry's eyes flashed with anger. Harmful, he repeated, his voice cold. You keep using that word like it's some objective truth. But who decides what's harmful? Michael, you. A group of academics who've never lived in the communities I'm portraying. Perry took a step forward, closing the gap between them until they were nearly face to face. Michael, I am a black voice. My audience is made up of black voices. The actors I employ, the crew members I hire, the communities I support, those are all black voices. And you're standing here trying to tell me that those voices don't matter because they don't align with your narrative. Strahan didn't back down. This isn't about my narrative, he said. This is about accountability. Perry's laugh was sharp and bitter. Accountability, he said. Where's the accountability for the studios that rejected me? Where's the accountability for the critics who ignored me until I became too successful to ignore? Strahan's expression shifted. That's deflection, Tyler, he said. You're deflecting from the real issue. Perry's face went hard. The real issue, he said slowly, is that you invited me here to publicly shame me. The real issue is that this entire interview was designed to make me look bad, and you're upset that I'm not playing along. Strahan's composure finally cracked completely. That's not true, he said, his voice loud and defensive. I'm doing my job. I'm asking questions that need to be asked. Perry shook his head. Your job, he said, his voice filled with contempt. Michael, your job is to read what's put in front of you and smile for the camera. Don't confuse that with journalism. The insult landed like a bomb. Strahan's face went completely white, his hands trembling at his sides. You don't know anything about me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with rage. Perry's expression didn't soften. But I know what I see, and what I see is someone who's using me as a stepping stone. I'm not going to be part of it. Perry turned away, addressing one of the producers directly. I want my team contacted immediately, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'm leaving now. Strahan watched, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. You're threatening legal action now, he said. Tyler, this is a new low. Perry turned back to him one last time. Michael, if you think protecting myself is a low, then you have a lot to learn about this industry, he said. I've spent 20 years building something real, and I'm not going to let one misguided interview destroy that. Strahan laughed, but it was hollow. Misguided, he repeated. Tyler, this was supposed to be a conversation. You're the one who turned it into a spectacle. Perry's eyes narrowed. I turned it into a spectacle, he said. Michael, you ambushed me with loaded questions. You wanted a confrontation, and now you have one. I hope it was worth it. The two men stared at each other, the tension suffocating. Perry turned away again, this time for good. He walked toward the exit, his steps measured and deliberate. No one tried to stop him. As he reached the edge of the set, he paused, looking back over his shoulder. For the record, Michael, he said, I don't regret my work. I don't regret the choices I've made. And I certainly don't regret walking away from this. With that, he disappeared through the exit, leaving behind a studio full of stunned faces and one visibly shaken host. Strahan stood in the middle of the set, his shoulders sagging as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The producers rushed toward him, but Strahan wasn't listening. He stared at the empty space where Perry had been standing, his expression unreadable. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of the chaos. And somewhere beyond the studio doors, Tyler Perry was already gone, leaving behind a moment that would be dissected and debated for days to come. So what do you think about this entire situation? Was Tyler Perry right to walk off, or should he have stayed and continued the conversation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And make sure you subscribe because we're going to be covering all the fallout from this interview. Let us know where you stand on this one.